All right, welcome back, everyone. We are going to continue this afternoon with our work sessions on the FY26 operating budget amendments and amendments to the FY25 to 30 capital improvements program. First up, we have our technology and enterprise business solutions. Thank you all for your patience and waiting. And we're going to take up agenda item 10 through 13. So this includes the TEBS budget, the device client management non-departmental account, the telecommunications NDA, and the cable TV and communications plan. The Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee had a very good work session with TEBS, and I do want to thank Director Roper, Ms. Randolph, and the whole team. We raised a number of questions that were responded to and asked the team to go back and look at were there ways to reduce some of the line items in thinking about how tight our budget is. And colleagues, you'll see on page 2 of the packet the decrease that TEBS came back with. It's a $784,000 decrease in the original budget that was sent over to us from the county executive, and I just want to say thank you so much for taking a look at these numbers again. In addition to that, another item we had questions on was the laptop replacement, and folks can look at the information we received back from TEBS on that and appreciate the deep dive and explanation of why we do our laptop replacement on the timeline that we do. In addition to that, we had a pretty robust discussion about the cable fund and how that was displayed in the packet. We are still waiting on information regarding that from finance and the county attorney's office. That has no budgetary implications, so today we can take a look at the committee recommendation to accept the reductions that TEBS has put forward and to accept the TEBS budget. So I don't know, Dr. Torregas, if I missed anything, or that's good. All right, Director Roper, did you have anything to add? All right, colleagues, any questions or anything? All right, well, all those in favor of accepting the committee's recommendation on this and the TEBS budget, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. All right, well, thank you.
You did such a good job in your pre-calls.
I know, we did. We worked hard. The next budget we have is the Department of General Services FY26 operating budget. And Mr. Mia is coming down. And Director Dice, it's good to see you back. Congratulations for the graduation.
One down.
One down. I know, feels good. So in general, the budget for general services, the Department of General Services, was pretty straightforward. The one question we did have that was outstanding on this budget was the request for an FTE to move from doing some contract services and to look at that some more and think about whether or not that was appropriate to move to the FTE given the budget constraints we've been talking about, or leave this under contract services and possibly to come back to us at another point, since you can extend this contract and it runs through February of 2026. And Director Dice, I don't know if Mr. Mia, did you have anything to add, or just, all right. Turn it over to Director Dice on what you considered at the request of the committee.
We'll continue with the contractual services, recognizing the fiscal constraints everyone's facing at this time.
Great. Well, we appreciate that. And so with that, the committee recommends the Department of General Services budget. Any questions? Councilmember Lukey.
Just wanted to thank you. Had a bold reminder this weekend as Olney Community celebrated its annual Olney Days events, and just wanted to thank you all for your commitment to the civic space, the community building there, and for being good partners in that work along with our state delegation. Thank you.
Terrific. All right. Well, with that, all those in favor of the committee recommendation for the general services budget, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. You all are done. All right.
You go to graduations more often.
Right. Leave Greg in charge. All right. The next we have is our Fleet Management Services FY26 operating budget and the FY25 to 30 capital improvements, county fleet electric vehicle charger station CIP, and I will turn this over to the T&E Committee Chair, Councilmember Glass.
Thank you. The T&E Committee voted to approve the operating budget as recommended by the executive. There are no other additions, reductions, or changes made by the committee.
Terrific. Mr. Mia, anything else? All right. Director Dicer, anyone? All right. All those in favor of the T&E Committee recommendation, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. All right. Thank you all. Okay, thanks. As noted, we did move the lease NDA to Friday, May 9th. So that brings us up to the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, MCEDC's NDA. And I will turn it over to the Chair of the Economic Development Committee.
Thank you so much, Madam President. I am so happy to see the evolution of MCEDC. I think the entire Economic Development Committee can say that we have seen how, especially the board of MCEDC has truly stepped it up and has also recognized that there were challenges happening and they're doing everything in their power to amend those challenges. As everyone knows, MCEDC is looking for a new executive director, and it is very important, especially today when we want to do everything in our power to attract more jobs and retain the talent that we have in Montgomery County. It's very important to have a strong Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. And for that to happen, we need to attract an amazing visionary to head that organization. And for that to happen, they do need to have I'm not going to say strong, because here we're just meeting your needs right now. I'm going to say a workable budget so you guys can do what you're supposed to be doing. So the Economic Development Committee agreed with the proposed enhancement that brings MCEDC closer in line with their actual spend in recent fiscal years. They did request an additional $450,000 that the committee said no, because we just can't afford that right now. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to the council staff if they have anything else to add. Okay, no. Yeah.
Great. Any comments from folks at MCEDC? Are you all good? All right. Any other comments? Seeing none, we have a committee recommendation for MCEDC's NDA for their FY26 operating budget. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. All right. Well, next up, we have Department of Environmental Protection, Recycling and Resource Management. And I think they're
Coming in right now.
all right. Compared to this morning, sometimes it's hard to tell. Director Monger, you guys can come up. We're just waiting for Mr. Lachenko. He's coming? Okay. We'll just take a breath. It's always good to do. Okay, we are ready to rock and roll and to spend the afternoon with the Department of Environmental Protection talking about recycling and resource management. And we will also take up the FY26 solid waste service charges. So thank you for being here today. And I will first turn it over to Chair of the Transportation Environment Committee, Chair Glass.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Appreciate your work and that of Councilmember Balcom over the last few weeks, sorting through the various items at the committee. And this was certainly a large item that, for everyone's situational awareness, we had a very in-depth conversation, but recognized there were so many different moving pieces and so many budgetary implications. The committee decided that it was most important for all 11 members of the council to engage in this conversation with DEP and staff so that we could all have a full understanding and the exact same briefing about what this budget means and what it does. And the budget does contain sharp increases in DEP's solid waste budget. And as the department will tell us, those rate increases are largely driven by short-term maintenance costs at the resource recovery facility, otherwise known as the incinerator, and early investments in a long-term waste facility, which is post-incinerator. And the fees that have been proposed by the county executive are not small. Fees would increase from $631 to $1,400 for small businesses and $310 to $419 for single-family homes. And as the theme of today has been, all of these things are not in a vacuum. They're all in this budget, all the different pieces that we've discussed today, and that's why it's important we talk about this. The committee, I'm not going to speak for the department, but the committee spent some time sorting through what the fee increases mean, where the different funding will go to, and the answer is it goes to different things. And we'll have that conversation in a few moments. But ultimately, the discussion we're having today has implications for how we collect our trash today, how it gets picked up, sorted, and disposed of, and it has implications for how that is done years into the future. This is not an insignificant conversation. There, as I noted, there are a lot of moving parts, and I appreciate all of our colleagues being here. I hope everybody engages and has a thoughtful conversation, because this is complex. And I appreciate DEP and OMB and council staff for working with all of us, getting us up to speed on what this discussion means. And now I'll turn it back to you, Madam President, to kick us off.
Great, thank you so much. And I will turn it over to Mr. Lachenko.
First up, I think it might be helpful to, as noted in the packet, there were some areas where the committee did conclude its work and make recommendations on certain areas of the budget. So it might be helpful to dispose of those first, literally, before we get to the main issues that Chair Glass mentioned. First, of course, to highlight, this budget is a part of two enterprise funds, the Solid Waste Collection Fund and the Solid Waste Disposal Fund. So the impacts from decisions made in these do not impact general fund discussions of affordability or the reconciliation list or things like that. So it's important to keep that in mind. However, as noted, there are significant solid waste service charge implications from this budget. But just as I note on page 2 of the cover sheet in the staff packet, first, with regard to the Solid Waste Collection Fund budget, the county executive had recommended a 5.3% increase, and that entire increase was really based on increases in the residential refuse collection contracts, which were increasing basically because of some inflators that staff can talk about if interested. But otherwise, there was actually a slight decrease for technical adjustments, and there were no adds or enhancements in the Solid Waste Collection Fund recommended. So it is truly a same services collection fund budget. Now, this budget is much smaller than the disposal fund side of things, which we'll talk about later. But I did want to note there that the committee did concur with the county executive's recommendations with regard to the solid waste collection fund budget. Regarding the solid waste disposal fund budget, here we do have that big increase that Chair Glass alluded to, a 30.6% increase. Now, interestingly here, we also don't have what we're calling service enhancements per se. It's providing a same level of service as assumed in FY 25 and to continue into FY 26, but you do have several large increases noted. Most notably, the one that Chair Glass referenced, the short-term capital maintenance and repair work for the resource recovery facility. That originally came over in March as a $35.5 million line item. And it's important to note that is current revenue within the solid waste disposal fund. So although we use the term capital work, it is not assumed to be funded with bonds. So that $35.5 million is the FY 26 recommended amount. And so that does have, that $35.5 million has an impact on the associated charges that cover that. And as we can talk about in a minute, DEP has noted that this work represents the work needed to allow for the safe and reliable operation of the RRF through the contract extension period of April 2031. The rest of the solid waste disposal fund budget, if you were to remove that piece, that $35.5 million, and set it aside for now, the rest of the solid waste disposal fund budget is increasing by 5.7%. And apart from the RRF short-term capital work that the committee felt did require further discussion, the committee did not raise any other issues regarding the other changes in the disposal fund as part of the FY 26 budget. Now, the other important thing to note is there is a CIP amendment that the executive transmitted back in March. This gets to the future discussion that Chair Glass is referencing. The executive transmitted an amendment for a new material recycling and biological treatment facility, or MRBT facility. And this amendment would initiate the planning and design work for that facility. And it included $12 million a year in FY 25, 26, 27, and FY 28. Now, once again, this money is assumed to be disposal fund current revenue. So once again, the current revenue will hit charges immediately. Unlike bonds, which would be spread out over many years, and the debt service would hit the charges, in this case, you have the full impact of that. So the $12 million in FY 26 would add on to the $35.5 million that you heard earlier regarding the RRF. So as Chair Glass mentioned, you really do have three things that are impacting the charges this year. You have what we may call the sort of the more normal or routine increases that are experienced in the solid waste disposal fund, but then you also have this big bump in maintenance and repair costs for the RRF that begin in FY 26, but then there's also some noted by the executive needed in 27 as well. And then you also have this the initiation of this CIP amendment going forward as well. So those three elements combine to generate the large increase in the charges that we mentioned earlier. The other thing I will note is DEP is in the process of working with a consultant, and a report is expected to be issued soon that looked at the long-term alternatives for waste disposal. So in terms of the big picture going forward, the council will be getting that report soon, and staff does suggest that the T&E committee and the council take that issue up in terms of the long-term disposal issues at the council as soon as possible after budget. And the sooner we can get through that, I think the sooner we can then also deal with the capital amendment project. Staff had suggested that the committee defer consideration of the CIP amendment because it is focusing on the future disposal alternative. But the council has not had the benefit yet to debate those different issues or discuss or receive a briefing even on those issues. So staff had suggested that the CIP amendment itself be deferred. The committee seemed amenable to that at the 24th session, but of course we're meeting today and can talk about that further. I think with that, I'll stop for the moment to see if Chair Glass wants to move on to some more specifically to the charges or further discussion of some of the issues I just brought up. Or Council President
Thank you, Mrs.
Stewart.
Lenchenko. First, I just didn't know if Director of DEP wanted to have any opening remarks or anything, or I can turn it back to Chair Glass and we can start with questions.
Happy to defer to the chair.
Okay. Chair Glass, you're up.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Levchenko, and again, thank you, Director Munger and DEP. So, complex discussion, and I think it's important to start with some of the baselines as to the fees that have been proposed, recognizing they go towards different goals. Director Munger, can you explain the differences, where the fees are going towards, and what those project goals are?
Sure. Thank you for the question, and thanks to all the council members for your attention on this important issue. My name is John Munger, and I have the privilege of being the Director of the Department of Environmental Protection. Happy to join you today. Chair Glass, it was summarized nicely by Mr. Levchenko in his summary, but in terms of what's driving the fee increases today, there's copious amounts of information in your packet, specifically on Circle 49, which is the last page of your packet. But Mr. Levchenko correctly summarized the charge categories, and as they're laid out on Circle 49, they note that the vast majority of the increases in the fees are dedicated to maintaining the current collection systems, and that includes critical repairs at both the transfer station in Durwood as well as the waste to energy facility in Dickerson. It also includes inflationary increases to contracts and labor. As you'll see on Circle 49, those are both noted in the blue columns. It also includes a much smaller amount for advanced waste processing technologies, planning and design, as was mentioned in the summary. So you're able to see there the breakdown of how much of the charges are attributable to maintaining current collections versus future facility planning and design. And you can see across all of the relevant categories, the amounts are the vast majority of the amounts are dedicated to maintaining our current collections.
Thank you, sir.
I did want to note, I forgot to mention earlier, the $35.5 million RRF costs, which were originally transmitted in March, was amended by the executive in April, and that number was reduced a bit in FY26 to $28.5 million. So that number went down a little bit. The overall amount that would be assumed for the RF projects did not change. DEP was able to find some savings in FY25 to help reduce some of the FY26 impact and also spread some of the cost, which was only in FY26 and FY27 to FY28. So that also was able to reduce a little bit of the burden on FY26. So the numbers on Circle 49 reflect the amended RRF costs as transmitted by the executive, the $28.5 million, not the $35.5.
I appreciate Circle 49 being in the packet so that everybody can look at it. Really important to look at it, but let's dive a little deeper into that. So according to that information, a single-family home would have an $85 increase, a fee increase, if the county executive's budget were adopted. Of that $85, $35 would go towards inflationary increases. $42 would go towards repairs, or as it notes here, critical repairs for the incinerator, and $8 would go towards future planning. Director Munger, can you break those down and speak more specifically about those different components?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Chair Glass. So as you are all well aware, we have an integrated waste system here in the county, which includes facilities in multiple locations, the transfer station in Durwood, as well as the waste to energy facility in Dickerson. So I want to note that when we're talking about the column that's designated critical repairs to operational safety and reliability, we're actually referring to projects both at the transfer station in Durwood and at the waste to energy facility in Dickerson. So the $42, for example, that you see designated for those repairs for single-family properties is inclusive of repairs at both sites. So when we talk about the types of projects that's making up that particular column, I'll give you a few examples here. But I think the primary thing which I've had the chance to talk with most members about to date, and I know is really important as we're thinking about the path forward here, is that the projects that we're talking about in that column are fundamentally necessary simply to maintain a viable MSW system in the county in the short term, and failing to approve funding for the projects that are listed here risk service disruption. So to give you just a few examples of what types of projects we're talking about, we're talking about things like boiler water wall tube replacements, cone replacements for scrubbers, and these are essentially projects that are both fundamentally dedicated to the reliability of the facility, the safety of the facility, and these projects are also designed to reduce environmental emissions coming from the facility. When we're talking about the transfer station, I want to note that, again, for context, typically very high volumes of waste are processed through our transfer station, up to 600,000 tons annually. So at the transfer station itself, there's very complex and large and also expensive equipment that's dedicated to make sure those volumes continue moving. So for example, there's a series of compactors which compact the MSW in order to transit it, and we've had a series of reliability issues with those. So again, the repairs that we're talking about, the transfer station, are limited to those that would allow us to maintain a viable system in the short term. When we're talking about the inflationary increase to contracts and labor, I'm sure it's no surprise to you all, but we're seeing increase in our contracts across the board, including labor increases, including inflation adjustments. There's a series of contracts which underlie our MSW system, and we're seeing increases in them across the board. So those are reflected in the smaller amount you see in the blue column to the left. You also asked about the future facility planning and design facility. So as was mentioned in the summary, this would be, as requested in the budget, $12 million in FY26, FY27, and FY28. And this would be for planning and design of technologies which would allow us to remove things from the waste stream that shouldn't be in the waste stream, that have value that the county can market, and it would also allow us to extract organics from the waste stream in order to reduce the emissions that would come from the waste stream.
We're going to keep diving deeper into these numbers here. So the $35 increase for single-family homes, and I'm just going to keep it to single-family homes. There's multifamily and businesses as well, but for continuity, keep it to single-family homes. The $35 for contracts and labor, that's non-negotiable, right? That has to be done, cost of doing business, just like we supported labor contracts and we support other inflationary costs. It is what it is. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, as I noted, you'll note that the columns actually note which of the costs are dedicated to maintaining current collections. It's inclusive of, but not limited to, that column. So essentially what we're talking about in blue, including that column, is simply just to make sure the system keeps operating.
Okay. Because there's staff, there's other things that we have to deal with. The second item is what you've deemed critical repairs. You said that fee is split between the transfer station and the incinerator. Can you break that down a little bit more?
Sure. So to give you a sense of the breakdown and the projects there, and as Mr. Levchenko was noted, in April we did send an amendment over, which was able to reduce the amount of FY26 dollars requested for these repairs by $7 million. The breakdown of the remaining total of $28 million is approximately $25.3 million for critical repairs to the waste to energy facility and just over $3 million for repairs to the transfer station in Durwood.
So it is overwhelmingly going to the incinerator, like 85, 90%.
Yes, 25 of the 28.
Yes, okay.
I'm a lawyer, so I won't do that math for you.
Councilmember Katz had his, I hope I don't have you, he had his calculator out as he was following the math. Yeah. I'm already out, so it's okay. But, so it's that time of day. So over about 90% of that going towards the incinerator. Why would we be investing that much money into a facility that we hope to close in the next few years?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Chair Glass. You know, I'll probably start to sound like a broken record at some point, but I want to underscore that perhaps a little bit of context for how we got here. And, you know, essentially the county is at no point looking to pay for projects which we do not need. And I think when we talk about the list of projects that we're talking about today, both in Durwood and in Dickerson, we're only talking about the projects that we do need. And so the answer to your question is we need them to maintain a viable MSW system. And that is, despite the fact that we are in the process of transitioning away from that system, we still need a system in the meantime to work to process the significant volumes of MSW that the county has.
It's been said to me that it's like investing in an old car that you know you're getting rid of, but you keep throwing money into it despite knowing a few years you're going to sell it or it's just going to fall apart. Is that a fair comparison?
I'm hesitant to extend that analogy, understanding the source of that analogy. You know, I think it's essentially to pull on the thread you're getting at there is these are essentially repairs that are necessary to maintain the viability of the system. So I think whether you're talking about a car, whether you're talking about another piece of equipment, I think the important thing to layer onto any analogy that we would choose to make is that there's not an optionality here. So I guess if you were going to extend the car analogy, you would be in a situation where you would be needing that car and you would be needing that car until you could get another one. But in the meantime, you would have to repair the car you have.
I hear you. And then last question before I really want colleagues to ask. That last column, the future planning facility. The county executive has said that he wants the incinerator closed, and that has been a pledge he and many of us have made for a number of years, except it's waited until now to offer up a solution. And it's not even a solution, it is a funding method towards a solution that the council has not been briefed on. We don't know anything about what the facility would look like. We don't know the capacity or, quite frankly, the plan. But yet we're being asked to increase fees to support this. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Chair Glass. As with any significant project that would be expected to take a number of years, this would be for initial planning and design funding. And when we're talking about these technologies, you know, a very simple way to think about them, it would essentially allow us to sort our trash stream and pull things out that shouldn't be in there in the first place. However, in order to start the process of planning and designing that, we would need funding to do that, and that's why you see a limited amount included in this budget, $12 million for FY26, with the same figure in FY27 and 28. From the initial analysis, which we've had a chance to share with TE members and welcome the opportunity to discuss with the broader council. We understand there's significant emissions reductions that could be realized from adding these technologies on to our waste stream, and that's the genesis of the request before you.
Thank you for all of your thoughtful responses. I have other questions, but want to open it up to colleagues.
Thank you. Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Thank you to the department. You guys do great work, and I always love working in different projects with all of you. To me, this is very simple at this point, and I'm gonna just agree with the staff recommendation. I understand the need of the increases, and for me, actually, my favorite page of this whole report is page 5, if anybody wants to follow. Now I lost my page. Page 5, there you go. You see that beautiful chart right there with the approved FY25, the county executive recommendation, and then the county executive amended recommendation. For me, there's no way I can approve any fee increases not knowing the plan, okay? So for me, the last column that you see in that chart, the very last one that says no MRBT, that's my option right there, which is basically means if you go back to page number 2, no to the CIP amendment on the MRBT, just because we're not ready. I need to be briefed. I need to understand the plan. I do not agree with trackings or sending or trash to another community, dumping trash to another community. That's something that I know has been discussed at some point. I just can't tell you, yes, I agree with $12 million now and then $12 million for the future and so on, without understanding what that means for us. I agree with you that there are certain fees that we need to keep the machine running because those are critical aspects of it, right? But that doesn't mean that I had to say yes to the CIP amendment that you're proposing here. So, which I think goes alongside with what Mr. Lanchenko from staff, council staff was saying. So if we look at page number 5, I will say no to the MRBT if at some point. Did I?
I just, if you'd like, I could briefly explain the structure of the chart so that
I would love that
so
they
that
can
the rest
vote.
of the council sort of understands what you're pointing to in the last column. So this chart is looking at the solid waste service charges that the typical or the typical customer in a sector would pay. And you have the single family in subdistrict A. So in subdistrict A, single family homes get their trash collected through county contracts. That's very different from subdistrict B, where they're responsible for either contracting them through themselves or through an HOA, but not through the county. So that's the distinction between the subdistrict A and B. Then you have the multifamily, and once again, they don't get the same level of services that the single family get. And then you have the non-residential. So those are the 4 main sectors shown here. The left column has the approved FY25 charges based on the services that those sectors get. Then the next set, or the next line over, is the CE recommended. This is the March recommendation. So this shows the equivalent charges if you were to approve the original March transmission by the executive. And then it has the percentage increase. Then the next line over, you start to get into what you called the CE amended. This is the April transmittal that we got. And this has the reduction in the RRF costs basically in it. That the $7 million that Director Monger mentioned. So that plays out a little bit here. Then I have what I call the base, and I couldn't come up with a better number for it. This puts aside the MRBT and the RRF, just to show if we weren't dealing with these short-term costs of the RRF right now, what would the typical increase be for all the other things that tend to happen from year to year in the fund? And so you still see a pretty significant increase just in the base alone. But then I have the one on the end, which is, as you noted, where council staff was, which is, well, the RRF costs have been pretty well identified and gone through and now gone through again as part of the CE's April amendment. DEP has made a pretty good case for the work that is needed there to have the facility remain operational and within its permit guidelines and everything else over the next 5 years. But the MRBT project is new to the council. And we know we're going to be getting this alternatives analysis that will allow the council to look at some of the things that Director Monger mentioned, the emissions reductions, operational benefits, also the unit cost, the per ton cost that we're going to experience under any option going forward. We're going to have capital costs. We're going to have ongoing operating costs. Having a discussion of those and the major assumptions that the consultant had to choose from in order to make their analysis work. And, where do we go from there? I think that's going to be critical for the council to hear. And maybe they will ultimately agree with the MRBT. Or maybe they'll want to go with another option.
Or maybe we don't. That's why I don't want to vote on it.
So we don't know. The one caveat I will say, and this is the challenge with solid waste charges, is they appear on the property tax bill. So the council gets one crack at them a year, which is May. So whatever we do in May, we do have to live with for the full year. So to the degree you were to reduce the charges based on not assuming the MRBT project, absent some found money elsewhere, then we would be returning to that project next year. It would not be something that we could approve to move forward during FY26. So that's the one caveat I wanted to note with this, that the charges can't be adjusted in November.
That's why you're just proving my point. And I feel so uncomfortable saying yes for now when I don't understand if that's actually the plan that we're going to agree on.
Right, we don't know.
We don't know. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Lachenko, just to clarify, thank you to Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez for pointing out the chart on page 5, and we were also looking at the chart on page 49, which is basically the same information just displayed
Yes,
differently?
it's
Okay,
very similar information displayed differently. The $85 number you heard in Circle 49, that does appear in this chart if you were to do the subtraction of the
Right.
two relevant numbers. But they were intended to show slightly different things.
I just want to make sure everybody is
yeah.
clear that those two charts are showing the same thing,
Right.
just in different ways.
Right, and I will
So-
say, the solid waste disposal fund rate model is complex. There's a lot of puts and takes, not just expenditures and revenues, but they also have financial metrics they have to meet. There's rate smoothing over time and fund balance issues and all of that. So whatever we do as part of this budget, we will then have to reset the rate model appropriately for that. And then if and when the council does come to a conclusion on long-term disposal options and perhaps future capital projects, that would then have to be inserted into the rate model to understand what the future impacts would be.
Great. And if I can just jump ahead and follow up on Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez's point, if we didn't include, and I'm going to look on page 49, the column that had future facility planning and design for Director Monger, if you could speak to that. So it's the light shaded green, and it would reduce the fee for the single-family home by $8, multifamily by $4, and the medium generator non-residential by $85. What would be the impact of not doing that?
Sure. So yes, you did the math right there, Council President. The impact of not doing that would essentially be we would be delayed in implementing that by, as was noted, based on the calendar, at minimum a year. I think that's just the way the calendar functions, and as you all understand the implications of that. But it would also mean that we would be unable to implement those technologies in a timeline that, as currently envisioned, would allow us to do so in parallel with transitioning away from the current MSW system, and understanding that those technologies would allow us to do so in a way that would reduce our emissions significantly.
I guess I'm trying to. We don't really have a plan yet, right? We have the starts of a plan to move us, and so again, I'm trying to figure out the delay of a year, if we haven't heard a plan yet, a fully formed plan from TE or the full committee. And I know there are ongoing conversations. So I'm just trying to get my head around, like, how can you continue planning for the next year and solidify that? Or does not doing this part of the fee kind of freeze you all from even doing any planning moving forward? So that's, I guess it's, because what I'm hearing from you is not that we're ready to implement anything. We're not ready to implement anything or get work under, happening. It's, we're still in this phase of figuring out what the plan is. And I guess that's what I was trying to figure out with this portion of the fee. Is that needed to continue to do the planning? Or can we, based on your budgets and what you have, can we continue to do the planning and then come back to us when we have a solid, well, no pun intended, solid plan, to then be able to figure out how much money? Because I just wanted to pull a little bit on what Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez was talking about, because so that's the distinction for me. Like, what is this money really going to? Because if you're saying it's going to actually doing work and everything, well, we all just said we're not ready to do the work because we don't know what it is. But if it's to go to something else, and if we don't have that, then none of the planning happens. That's what I kind of want to know.
Sure. So thank you for the question. The figure that's represented in the budget is, in fact, to fund planning and design work. So when you're talking about a system as large and complex as the one we have here in Montgomery County, and you're talking about transitioning that system, funds are needed to plan and design alternative systems. And that's what the funding request for FY26 you're seeing is here. And just to dive a little bit deeper on what that looks like, because I think it'd be helpful context, the way the work would be structured would be essentially we would be entering into a short-term contract with a vendor to help us to plan and design the project moving forward. But the contract we would be entering into at this juncture with this limited funding would be limited to planning and design, what's called pre-construction services. So it wouldn't quite be jumping in the pool as much as it would be getting in the water so we can be getting ready to swim, if that analogy works. Maybe I should go back to cars. Yeah, okay, back to cars. But the point being, the funding is needed given the complexity of the transition we're talking about. Funding is needed to actually plan and design the transition. So not having the funding to do so would effectively prohibit the ability to do so in any in-depth way.
Thank you. Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. I want to thank you and your team for these discussions. I know that it's been difficult, and I appreciate you reaching out to colleagues. So when we were in the T&E committee, the T&E committee did not make a recommendation on this because we did not want to make a decision that the full body would rely on when we simply don't have all the information. So just as you have questions, we also had those questions. And so I think it's just important to know how we ended up having this discussion now. I feel very frustrated, and I've shared this, that we're having a discussion of this magnitude right in the middle of our budget deliberations. And the reason that that's happening is because of the timing of the decision to shut the incinerator. We had the county had to make a determination because of the contract. The contract is up April 2026. But we've known that for a very long time. And so to wait till the year before to request funding, I think is just terribly unfair to the body to make a decision
as I said, of this magnitude in the budget process. So I just wanted to share that with colleagues. I've said that a couple of times in the T&E committee, and I just wanted to reiterate that. So just a couple questions. The repairs. So, and I accept that, you know, your assessment that the repairs are necessary for the functioning of the incinerator. So why weren't the repairs made all along? And why are we stuck with, and is it 64 million, the total amount of the repair, 61 million? I've tried to just do the math.
Thank you. So, thank you, Council Member, for the question. So, working backwards from your multiple questions. So, the total amount, and I just want to underscore again, these are for repairs both in Durwood at the transfer station as well as in Dickerson, given that both are critical pieces to our MSW system. So, the total over the FY 25, 6, 7, and 8 for repairs at both sites would be 66.4 million.
Okay.
And that information's in your packet.
Yep.
And then coming back to your previous question about the schedule of repairs, you know, I'll provide a bit of context here, but some of this, and I'm sorry for those of you on TE, this may be a little bit repetitive, but as you know, in recent years, the county and its consultants have been evaluating alternatives to the system we have, including costs and timing to implement an alternative MSW management system. For a system that manages nearly 600,000 tons of MSW per year, it's a complex multi-step project, and in other jurisdictions, transitions of the scale can take a decade or more. But as you know, we've also strived each and every year, including this year, including by virtue of the efforts we've made recently to reduce FY26 costs as much as possible through schedule adjustments and through funding repairs with FY25 funding. In previous years as well, there's been efforts to make sure that costs have been kept as low as possible for ratepayers. And essentially, by not making repairs and replacements necessary beyond what was critically necessary prior, rates in previous years were able to stay at the levels that they were at. But consequently, at this point, moving forward, repairs are necessary to make sure the system continues functioning. So I understand that's, well, I guess I'll just take a step back and say, you know, this is an issue that jurisdictions nationwide grapple with. And for those of you who have been reading up on it, there was a recent quite long article in the Washington Post about how Miami-Dade was assessing its options and having to move forward between waste systems. And you know, at the end of the day, these are significant amounts of waste that are being generated in county, and expenditures are necessary to make sure there's a system that can process it all. So you know, I can't I guess what I would say about the FY26 budget is that this is a representation of what it's going to take to do so moving forward. To your question of could the expenditures have potentially been done sooner? Yes, they would have still had significant prices associated with them, just given the nature of the volumes that are in play here.
Okay, thank you. And then from the perspective of the charts on, 46, 47, 48, the rate increase that's being proposed right now, is that for all of the repair or just the repairs in FY26?
So before us at the moment is FY26 repairs.
Right. So if we look at 27 and 28, we're going to be faced with similar rate increases in 27 and 28. Maybe not to the magnitude, but we still have another 21 million to go in 27 and 28. Or, well, actually more than that. Probably 25 million.
Yes, so the relevant 6-year fiscal health projection was included in the March budget transmittal and includes the numbers you're referring to, council member. But at this time, rates are expected to continue to increase slightly, not solely because of repairs needed, but also because of, as we've discussed before, increased base and debt service costs are also factored into the rates.
Okay, thank you. And then last question, maybe not the last question, the transfer station. Are any of these related to the closure of the incinerator, or is this basically what needs to happen at the transfer station?
So I'm going to let my colleague Willie Wayner answer this question, who oversees the Recycling and Resource Management Division. He can speak more in depth on the transfer station repairs.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Council Member, for the question. Yeah, the transfer station, these are not repairs per se. These are replacements of equipment that has reached the end of life. For example, compactor number 3, we have 4 compactors that process trash at the transfer station. Each one of them costs about over $3 million. And this compactor, first of all, transfer station was inaugurated back in 1982. And these compactors are over 40 years old. And they really reached the end of life. One of those compactors was replaced a couple years ago, and now we have 3 compactors that are about 40 years old with a lot of maintenance and a lot of downtime to the system. So $3.5 million out of the close to $9 million in replacement at the transfer station is due to this compactor. Mm-hmm. And the rest is either refurbishments of rolling equipment like loaders and that are also reaching the end of life. So those are all piece of equipment that we're going to be using no matter what type of no matter what type of system we get in the future. We will need this piece of equipment at the transfer station.
Okay, thank you. And then my real last question, I appreciate the comments from Council President Stewart. So the planning and design, and the question of we haven't decided what design of what. So how much would the planning be versus actual design of a system that we haven't yet seen?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, Council Member.
So I understand that you need that in order to determine what or come up with a proposal for what we're going to do with our solid waste for the foreseeable future. There is going to be planning dollars, design dollars, construction dollars, right? So you're proposing $12 million for the next 3 years. So if we're just looking at planning and looking at what this system's going to be, that's different than design. I would assume that the planning costs are significantly less than the design cost.
So according to the engineer estimates that we've received, the expected value of the work that would need to be done over the next 3 years in order to move as quickly as possible towards subsequent development of the project is $12 million. Planning would obviously come first. So you're right in assessing that these will be different phases of the projects. As I mentioned, it would be done through a cooperative pre-construction services agreement during which the county would be working very closely with the developer who was engaged for that process, and it would initiate with planning, but the $12 million would be the necessary funding to initiate that work this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Well, thank you to the last two, to Council President and to Councilmember Balcom. I've crossed a number of my questions off, but I'm going to do a slightly different line of questioning here. The first, just to play off of what was just shared, the issue with the pool analogy is that we don't even have a pool yet. So the idea that we're deciding just to jump in the water or testing out what the temperature is like, or deciding, what kind of water we want, salt or, chlorine cleaned or whatever. We don't have a pool. We don't even have an idea of the size of the pool. We don't know how much the pool is going to cost. We don't know where the pool is going to go necessarily, exactly on what parts of the land. Is it, going to be built concurrently next to and then phase out? I mean, we just don't know the answer to any of those questions, and you all are doing everything that you're being asked to do. So this is in no way a criticism of you, but I think what you're hearing is a frustration that the county executive has been railing against this and been talking about getting the county out of the incinerator, a view that many people share. If and when there is a viable, reasonable, equitable alternative, but has not done anything to move us in the direction of actually getting out of the incinerator. Up until this point where before there is a plan, before we know anything of what the intentions are, how much it's going to cost, what we're committing ourselves to, and what the impacts are going to be, costs and social impacts, we're asking residents to pay huge fee increases. And that's just a real difficult thing for us to grapple with. And it is frustrating that we can't take a step back and just have, outside of the budget process, a briefing on, here are 5 options that different jurisdictions have done. Here's how they worked. Here's how much they cost. Here's how long they took to implement. Here's how they phased from one waste system to another waste system. And then a plan over the next 5 years of how we're going to move forward with it. So that's just a lot of the frustration that you're hearing. In terms of the repairs, how do we get there? I'm just a little bit concerned. There's 2 elements to this essentially. There are the critical repairs piece of it and just the cost that all of a sudden snuck up on us somehow. And then we have the $36 million, $12 million over 3 years for a new plan that we're asked to go in blind, essentially, and just take it on trust that we're going to be moving in a direction that all of us will be comfortable with, and not really knowing what we're committing ourselves to beyond that, which is an open question and an area of concern that I have that I know is shared by others. How do we get to the critical repairs point? I mean, you mentioned the 40-year-old compactors, the transfer station. We replaced one of those a few years ago. How do we pay for that? Didn't we know that some of these critical repairs were going to happen? And some of it is at the transfer station, but as you noted, the overwhelming majority of it is at the incinerator. Was this just, we didn't want to take seriously the needs at the incinerator because we were hoping that there would be a plan to get out of it, but no plan ever emerged, and now we're finally getting around to actually moving forward, and so we've neglected it for the last 7 years? I mean, how did this happen? How do we get to the point where we have these massive increases, and now it's a no optionality here, regardless of what you would like to do, regardless of any choices you want to make, we're asking residents to pay huge fee increases to cover these costs? How did that happen?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. So as you noted, the county is committed to closing the incinerator and shifting to an improved MSW system. In recent years, as I mentioned, the county, with the support of technical consultants, has been evaluating alternatives to the system that we currently have in place, including, and as you noted, there's a number of considerations, cost and timing to implement those systems. So as I noted previously, transitioning a system of the scale of the system that we have here in Montgomery County is a complex multi-step process, and at the same time, for obvious reasons, and we've heard that from the council today, there's not a huge appetite in making investments in a system that we are also actively in the process of moving away from. So during this period of assessment, the county has avoided making repairs and replacement beyond those that are necessary in order to keep rates relatively low. However, regardless of the system transition, the county in the meantime, as I noted earlier, needs to make sure we are funding the system simply in order to keep it operational. So the investment in repairs that we're talking about today, again, both in Durwood and in Dickerson, were included in the FY26 budget because they are the minimum projects that are necessary to keep the system operating and safely and reliably moving forward.
So did the county executive, did the department, did the administration expect there to already be a plan in place by now, and that just hasn't happened, and that's why it's been neglected for 7 years? I'm just trying to understand how we got here and to avoid what Councilmember Balcom was noting earlier. Are we going to be here in the next few years where nothing has changed from the point of we still want to get out of the incinerator, we still want a plan to move forward, you're moving forward with that plan. There's not a lot of interest in putting money into an outdated car, if we're going to go back to that analogy, to keep it running for as long as it's needed. What's changed? Because it's not clear that there is a fundamental change now from what has taken place before that's going to avoid these issues moving forward. So maybe you don't have an answer for that, and I understand, but that's still a little unclear to me. I did want to ask, in terms of the services and who is paying for them, the multifamily, the residential and the non-residential, I just want to pin down a multifamily property, a sub-district B property, and a non-residential property. What services in terms of waste are they getting from the county that they're paying these fees for? Because I know sub-district A, single-family homes, they're getting essentially full services of their trash pickup, as far as I am aware. Can you just explain what multifamily properties, sub-district B properties, and non-residential properties are getting in terms of what's considered base services?
Sure. So thank you for the question, council member. So the services that are provided to residents and residents across the county vary on where you live in the county. And the waste generation rate for each sector, be it multifamily, single family, or non-residential, is based on the share and the rates that each sector pays, and it's allocated based on the percentage of waste generation. So the short answer to your question is that the services you get from the county depend on where you live. And as you noted, services that might be available down county are not available in other parts of the county. Some residents receive leaf collection from the county, some do not. So it really is localized based on where in the county you reside.
Okay, so just to be clear, sub-district B, just as an example, what exact services are they getting specifically to pay for these base fees?
Sure. So when we're talking about the base fees, these are fees that apply across the entire county, regardless of the unique services you're receiving from the county. That's essentially why we call them the base fee, because they're base services that fund essentially the equipment that allows us to have a waste system in the first place.
You're really good at answering these questions. I give you a lot of credit. I just want to be clear, though, to synthesize it down. Sub-district B, what is the difference between what sub-district B gets in terms of trash pickup, for instance, and sub-district A?
Sure. I'm going to let my colleague Vicki Wan answer this question because she can tell you a little bit more localized, and Vicki also lives up county, so she can talk to you about her experience receiving county services.
So the rate is broken up by the base cost. And in your packet, actually, Mr. Levchenko did a really good job about pointing out the various costs related to the system's benefits charge.
Yeah, I understand the cost. I'm just trying to hone in on the services. Because we've been talking about this is the cost of doing business,
So I'll
and
give
this
you
is
an-
what you pay to get your trash picked up.
Right.
But if you're in Subdistrict B, is your trash getting picked up by the county?
So the cost increase is really to the base system, to the infrastructure charges. So all the county residents will pay and properties will
Whether-
pay this base.
Whether you're getting your
Whether
trash
you are
picked up
getting your
or not.
trash picked up or not. If you are in Subdistrict A, you have another $160 tacked on to your bill for the collection service of trash. But that, at the end of the day, you're paying base costs for recycling, for the infrastructure.
But the largest fee,
The largest
on the
fee is
base.
the base.
yeah.
This is
So
the base increase.
this is a huge fee increase that's being charged, including to many folks who are not getting their trash picked up by the county. They're paying into a broader system, and admittedly, they go to restaurants and they, create waste in other places besides their homes. But that's not how it's been discussed, and I just think it's important that we acknowledge and note that what we're talking here is the base fee, which includes folks who are not getting their trash picked up at their home or their place of business. They're separately having to contract that out, and they might be paying more for that too. So I just think that that's important. Is the same thing true of multifamily and non-residential? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, in answer to your question, the residents in Subdistrict B, as you're pointing out, don't have trash collected by the county. They do have recycling, I believe, by the county. That's not the most expensive part of the system, just collecting it. The residents in Subdistrict B, that material is still going to the transfer station. It's still going to the incinerator. They still have to pay for the cost to operate those facilities. That's what the system benefit charges.
Understood. And same is true of non-residential and multifamily?
Correct.
And multifamily, just so everybody's clear, multifamily includes condo co-op, owner units and rentals. Non-resident, because sometimes we call commercial properties different things. Non-residential in this case would be like an office building or a retail facility. So
That's correct.
Just to be clear on that. Okay, last question, and then I'll yield back. You mentioned earlier that there's been a lot of work happening. It just hasn't been shared with the public. It hasn't been shared with the council, in terms of, all these plans and ideas of where the county executive would like to go with this. Part of the reason why you feel you're ready to move forward with planning and design. One, I'm not sure I fully got the answer to Councilmember Balcom's question of why couldn't we separate out and just move forward with understanding what the scope and the magnitude and the options are, which seems like the less expensive part, as opposed to the design and architecture and plans, which seems like the more technical and expensive and nuanced part, why we couldn't split those out and why we have to commit to all of this today, which is, frankly, blind, as we talked about, without a whole lot of information, number one. And number two, you mentioned that work had been done already, which means that it seems like it wasn't paid out of the fees, unless I'm mistaken. It was paid somewhere else in the county budget, maybe the county executive's budget, maybe your budget, but maybe it was paid out of the fees here. But if you could explain how the work that was done to this point was paid already and why there wouldn't be similar funds to move forward, at least with an initial phase of this, so we can understand, for instance, just 4 or 5 options of other places that have done something similar. You talked about how jurisdictions all over the country are dealing with this. Everybody's got waste. Everybody has to deal with that waste. Everybody's looking at transitions. The climate, dynamics and the impacts on communities are not unique to us. If you could just walk through that, that would be helpful.
Thanks for the question, council member. So the work that's been done to date is limited analysis that was funded in the FY25 budget. It was $3 million approved by council last year, and that was also paid out of the solid waste fund. In terms of, I think one of the themes that I've heard from members today is that there's a number of questions that need to be answered about what this transition would look like, particularly what the new technologies would look like that have the promise of allowing the county to reduce the emissions from our waste stream significantly. And the truth of the matter is that without funding put towards that work, we won't be able to develop the type of planning that will be necessary to answer all of the questions that we're going to need to answer as a county. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, but if we are not able to actually start the planning process, we won't have resources or the ability internally to answer the types of questions that we're going to need to get to as we move forward with this conversation. And to the question of could the work be tiered out and would that result into a translation and reduction, that's not our understanding at present. But to the extent that there was a desire to consider tiering the work differently, we could certainly have that conversation moving forward. But I want to underscore that if there's no funding, we won't be able to move forward at all.
It will be helpful to know what level of funding would allow you to move forward with a initial phase of planning to at least understand what the options are. I'll note the $3 million that you mentioned for the very cursory, it sounds like a lot of money for what we have so far, which is not a whole lot that's been shared with us, but that would have covered the full cost of the transfer station critical repairs that are absolutely no optionality at all. And so I think there is some prioritizing here that is a bit of a challenge. But if you could share that with us at the appropriate time, it would be helpful. And I also think it would be helpful for us to understand what, if any, capacity there would be within the DEP budget with DEP personnel to take on at least some of the initial part of this, to just understand what our options are, what other jurisdictions have done, what the scope and the magnitude would be, because I feel like we're very early on in this and we're being asked to commit to quite a lot. It's not just the $36 million over 3 years, which already sounds like a lot for planning and design. It's what would probably be hundreds of millions of dollars of an entirely new waste system, which, is just a major question for us to grapple with. And it's impossible for us to do in, 6 weeks during a compressed budget schedule under the wire. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilmember Alvarez.
Thank you. Well, I hope there's something stiff in that Yeti, Director Monger. So let me just say how much I appreciated the conversation that you and your team had with me a week ago. Many of my questions were answered then. I was very skeptical of this fee going into that conversation. I appreciate the questions and comments from colleagues. I think the fees, sadly, particularly in the category of addressing the immediate needs of the incinerator, are the cost of doing business, for better or worse, given the circumstances. I do associate myself with the comments of colleagues, particularly in that the MRBT category, mostly just we're at a position right now because of the conversations we've been having about the current status of the world, anything we can do to provide relief, immediate relief to county residents who are having to pay additional WSSC fees. We're discussing a potential income tax increase. I mean, people are being hit in every possible direction. And so to the degree to which there are things we can control that ease some of that pain, I think we should actively pursue. I guess I wanted to focus on just two questions, one that hasn't been asked yet. And this mostly gives you an opportunity to uplift this issue since we're in a public space, but did get some compelling letters from our hospital association regarding their concerns about this increased fee and the impact on our hospital system. I think they estimated that just the increase alone would cost more or less the cost of a new MRI machine, which is obviously substantial. But as you explained to me, the way that policy is currently written, obviously those that have more trash pay more. But could you talk a little bit more about that, particularly for those industries that have been hard hit by current times and why there's not much relief we can provide them at the moment?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Council Member. So, yes, as I mentioned earlier, to provide a little bit more context about the rate structure here in Montgomery County, which is set in Section 48 of the County Code, the waste generation rate for each sector is used to determine the share of the rates that each sector pays. So what does that mean? It means the base expenses are allocated to each sector by their respective waste generation percentages. So the more waste you generate, the more you pay to fund the system that processes that waste, which which sounds quite logical. But just to dive a little bit deeper, so what that means is that when it comes to the non-residential sector, it's a formula-based allocation, which is, there's more detail in your packet, but essentially the fee for the non-residential sector is calculated using formula that includes the gross floor area, i.e. the size of the facility, and how much waste they generate there. So space and volume of trash. By contrast, the way the rate structure currently exists for both multifamily and single family, those are flat rates for each of those sectors.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So if this is something we want to tackle moving forward, it would have to be addressed in the code. That's obviously not before us. I'm not proposing anything right now, but it is something we're going to have to think through moving forward, particularly as the fees potentially continue to increase. My last thought is more of a comment. So DEP directors have been looking at this issue for 20 years plus. And everybody has been trying to figure out a way, particularly under this administration, of finding a viable alternative. And nobody has been more aggressive than this county executive through his appointed DEP directors in finding solutions. And there hasn't been one that's been identified, in part because there is no silver bullet. And there are costs and pros and cons associated with every respective angle that we look at, but it's all going to largely be predicated on significantly minimizing the amount of waste we each produce, both collectively and individually. And then and only then are we going to have more options and viable options moving forward. So this has been kicked down, the can has been kicked down the road for a long time. Literally. And now we are coming to a head. And so now it falls under your responsibility with where the bouncing ball has landed at the moment. And I do believe you are doing your best to make do with a difficult circumstance. The failure of the current system would be catastrophic, and it's not something that we can even play with. And so I understand why it's important for us to continue to make these types of repairs to just maintain the level of system that we have. So I will reluctantly support the fee increase relative to the improvement of the incinerator, or the ongoing maintenance of the incinerator and the ongoing projects. But I agree with Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez, just saying that publicly regarding that last category. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you, Director Munger, and your entire team. Just to put a finer point on the B area I'm in that area. I have a private hauler. City of Gaithersburg does not pick up trash. City of Rockville does. And I do pay a separate recycling fee. I pay a private. So my first question is, does every private hauler that picks up in Montgomery County, do they have to bring the trash that they pick up to the Montgomery County facility?
I'm going to let my colleague Willie Wayner respond. Thanks for the question, Council Member.
So the base fee contains also the tipping fee for the transfer station. So everybody in the county could bring that material.
You said could bring.
Could bring.
Yes, but the question is, do they?
There are some private companies that decide to internalize that volume into their own facilities outside of the county. But if they choose to bring it to the transfer station, it will be free for them if they are paying that base fee.
But well, first off, anyone that would go to the transfer facility that doesn't use a private hauler, just takes their trash and takes it to the they're already paying that fee anyhow because that's on their tax bill. Correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
So, but a private hauler doesn't necessarily have to use our facility. The second question is, what do other jurisdictions charge for this type of service?
Thanks for the question, council member. It's a difficult question to answer because many surrounding jurisdictions fund their solid waste programs through means other than a systems benefit charge like the one we have here. So it's difficult to compare. But we have done some comparison, and I'll let my colleague Kaylee Lolliker speak more to the comparison that we've done as we compare to other counties. But it's not an exact one-for-one just based on the funding structure.
Okay.
Hi, so just looking at the one that is sort of the most similar to the way that we handle it in terms of the funding structure, we did look at Prince George's County, and so they have separate fees for non-residential and residential properties. For non-residential properties, they charge a fee per square foot, again, depending on low, medium, or high generator categories, so sort of similar to ours. Our fee is based on each 2,000 square feet. So if you multiply it out, it does appear that their non-residential fees are higher than ours. It would be about ranging from about $10,000 per 2,000 square feet for a low generator to $35,500 for a high generator. So it does appear the non-residential rates in Prince George's County would be higher than what ours are or would be under this proposed fee increase. The residential system benefit charge is in Prince George's County is $35.49 per unit. So that's lower than what we're proposing. But again, it's difficult to do a direct comparison because of the differences in the way their fees are structured.
Well, you're saying that it's lower than what you're proposing. You're proposing an additional, I just lost that chart. The $35, or is it on 49? We're suggesting that would be an additional $85 for a single family, and you're saying they're charging $35?
Yeah, just for their system benefit charge, they also have additional charges for refuse collection, just like we do.
Well, and I understand that part, but just for the system, it would be like comparing B to B, then they're charging $35, and we'd be charging an additional $85, which is 27% more than what someone is paying now. So would that be someone in Montgomery County would be, what is being suggested here would be paying close to $400, $350 for single-family trash just for the system itself. Am I wrong on that?
No, that's correct, but I'll just note that it's an integrated system with charges allocated across sectors that obviously add up to fund the total system. So if you're looking at residential, single family, multifamily, and then commercial as well, if you pull the lever down in one of those categories, the lever has to come up in another one of those categories because of the cost of the underlying system. So I think what was noted is that there's a delta of an increase between the non-residential rates, but a delta of a lower in the residential. So I'll just note that in both cases, it's funded by different revenue streams that are structured differently.
And I appreciate that that's a confusion. But the bottom line is that we're saying for 2,000 square foot commercial. Well, most grocery stores, especially anymore, are around an acre, which is 44,000 square feet, or 60,000 square feet, or whatever they are. So just the additional, and he caught me, I was looking at my calculator, but just for the additional for a grocery store, in Montgomery County, the way this is being proposed, it would be about $16,000 more per year for that grocery store to be in existence in Montgomery County. Guess who gets to pay for that additional fee that they're paying? It's the person going to that grocery store. This is, to me, what we have done is put the cart before the horse. We don't have all the information, and I appreciate that you have to have the, whatever it is, the $35 for the inflationary and contracts. I understand that. But for the critical repairs, the question is what's critical and what's not. All of the trash that is picked up, whether it's single family, whether it's multifamily, whether it's medium, all of it goes to the same place. Every part of it. It's not, unless they decide that a private hauler is not even bringing it to us. So I have tremendous concerns with this. I do. I understand we need to have trash pickup. I understand we have to have trash pickup, and we have to have a place to put it. But as far as I'm concerned, I believe we need to look at what is the possibility of having the least amount of repairs that can be done so that we can get to a major conversation on what's the next step, rather than say, let's spend $63 million over 5 years and then get rid of the system. It to me is absolutely illogical. I understand you're in a rough spot, but to me, that's an absolute illogical system. That's where I am. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you, Madam President. Taking everything in that everybody's been saying, and of course, as we had an earlier discussion about the incinerator a little earlier this spring, and I note that Councilmember Fanny Gonzalez raised, I don't like making my trash other people's problems, and I was really, really direct about that because that was what, in fact, had happened where I grew up, because where I grew up was where other people's trash came, because it was one of those communities that, didn't have a lot of pull, as they say, right? And I understand, that this has been in the works for some time to try and find a solution to closing the incinerator. But also, I feel like there is this hyper push right now, and that is adding on additional fees here in the form of the planning and design aspect of this, which is the column that I too have concerns with and I'm not interested in advancing, mostly because, and somebody did say concept of a plan, and I actually think that phrase was used by somebody who's down the street in a white building. And I don't want to fund a concept of a plan, and I do want to know what the $3 million that was funded in FY25's budget, what did that by us in terms of this process, because I think that's really important for the public to know. And we have less than 60 days left in this fiscal year. So could someone speak to that?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Council Member. So just to sort of, I think, separate your question into two pieces, both of which are important, and I appreciate you raising. So the future design planning work that's underway, and for which you also see a budget item request in the FY26 budget, would, as I mentioned, be used towards planning and designing an advanced waste processing system for the county. Initial planning, initial analysis around that work was completed with the assistance of engineering consultants in FY25, and that analysis is what we have at this point, and what gives us a sense of what the technology holds for counties like ours. It also gives us a sense of where it's operating elsewhere, how it works, what type of diversion rates you can expect to receive in terms of what you can pull out of the trash stream. So I just want to note that when we're talking about that work, we essentially were able to use a much smaller amount of money, granted still significant funds, in order to do analysis around this work and how it compares to our existing system, so that we have a starting point to understand that technology as it compares to what we have and as it compares to other systems. That funding is separate and a part of what most of the budget requests we're talking about here today in terms of dollars is, which is more, the larger dollars that we're talking about are about about critical repairs for systems continuity. Is that, but I want to make sure I'm answering your question.
No, I understand the chunk of the fees that are related to the repairs of the existing, fully appreciate that we have to keep the incinerator running presently because there isn't an alternative. We don't have another solution. We aren't in that phase of it yet, right? And I guess, part of it is $3 million. Did the report for the figuring out the advanced waste processing system and comparing it to other jurisdictions that have it versus what we have now, is that what cost $3 million?
So part of the funding was used for reviewing multiple alternatives that are reflected in that report, but we've also conducted an assessment of environmental factors, feasibility here in Montgomery County because there's site-specific determinations, i.e. what exists in another part of the country or another part of the world might operate a certain way. We need to have an analysis about how that would work if we were able to do it here in Montgomery County. And additionally, because of the number of contracts involved with any type of systems change, there's a procurement process which needs to be followed. And as part of the funding was also used to assist with the development of the procurements that would need to come as part of this process. So those are some of the uses that have been put to use from the FY25 funding, but it's not limited simply to the report.
Okay, so in terms of it sounds like a portion of that funding was used to figure out how to do procurements for whatever it is you're going to come up with that would need to be. How do you? How was the money spent on figuring out how to procure a thing that hasn't been identified yet?
Yeah, so it's a good question, right? And we talked a little bit about the chicken and egg. And so I mentioned earlier that the mechanism through which the county is planning to proceed with this work would be through what's known as a pre-construction services agreement. And that essentially would allow us to enter into a contract with an entity that would work with us in the years leading up to the construction of that facility, so that we would be actually working hand in glove with that contractor to answer those questions. Because as you said, like this is a technology that exists elsewhere in the world, but is not widespread yet, and so we do need to do that work on the front end. But the way we would do that would be through the pre-construction services contract. So we would actually be doing that with the help of a contractor, given what we're talking about in terms of scope and complexity.
Right. Okay. So it exists somewhere else in the world. And for purposes of this, we're talking about, we'll call it green column on circle 49, right? Since we haven't referred to the page numbers in a while, I'll stick with the council president's circle 49. So green column 49 is a thing that exists in other places in the world and could provide some good functionality here in the context of whatever it is we ultimately are able to figure out and decide on, because it is just with respect to this technology is with respect to removing additional items from the waste stream that could in fact be recycled, right? But we don't know what else. We don't have all the other questions answered. Yes, we're trying to do multiple things in multiple ways to reduce the overall amount of trash that goes into the waste system by composting, food scraps composting, recycling, etc. So my question is, this is one piece of a thing which ultimately the full analysis, once you've figured out your comprehensive plan, may not fit into it. Is that a possibility?
So I think your question really exemplified how many aspects of this issue there are, council member. But I think what I would offer as a framing for how we can think about this issue going forward is that there's a number of complementary aspects to how we reduce the amount of waste in this county.
Sure.
And I think about it, I'm a simplistic person, so I think about it in three categories that are distinct. There are source reduction strategies, which are things we can do that prevent things from existing as trash in the first place. Thank you, Council, for your support of the Bring Your Own Bag bill. So, for example, because of that bill, there will be fewer bags that exist as trash to begin with. It never existed. It wasn't built. It was not produced for that purpose because we had a strategy on the front end.
Right.
Another category of projects that were that are very important and we're very ambitious with in Montgomery County are our recycling programs. So that includes all the things we talk about when it comes to mixed recycles, composting, and all of the strategies that we have to take things that are in existence and might be in our kitchens already or in our lives elsewhere and do something with them other than throw them away. And then there's the much less fun third category, which is what we're talking about today,
Right.
By and large, which is what about everything else that still ends up in the trash?
Right.
And that's a tough category when you're talking about a county as big as ours, and it's a tough category, as we've acknowledged, for jurisdictions across the country. But the reason I think that the technologies we're talking about in the green column are important and will be relevant to the conversation going forward is these actually allow us to sort what's in the trash stream, which none of the other buckets do. So we might stop things from being produced in the first place. We might recycle things. But what this technology would actually do what you've all, thank you, taken the time. Those are some encouraging
That's a lot.
encouraging signs from above here.
Not sure how to
I told you
interpret
it's
that
not
right
the most
now.
fun category.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that, but like my concern is that there is a very real possibility that, given the ephemeral nature of the other factors that relate to the whole what is needed comprehensive strategy to get us to closing the incinerator, that it is entirely possible that 3 fiscal years worth of $12 million chunks a year could get us to a place where ultimately the decision is that's not the direction we needed to go. And now we've spent $36 million, but because we have so many question marks on the other associated pieces, it might not be the thing that ultimately we need to build, right? And that's my question. Is that a possibility that could happen?
So it's a difficult hypothetical to answer, council member, but before the heavens started weighing in and telling me to stop I stopped talking. What I was going to say about these technologies is that they do really operate in a way that is distinct from and complementary to the other categories. So even if we go full speed ahead on all of the source reduction and all of the recycling, these just by definition operate differently because they would actually be sorting the third category of our waste stream. And so I know that's not a complete answer to your question, but I think what I would offer is that even with those other categories, this is a complementary strategy that also by virtue of the fact that we'd be talking about a mechanized system as opposed to something that is reliant on changing consumer behavior, which we know is very difficult to do, that it would give us a more objective path to understanding and realizing what rates of diversion we could expect from our waste stream, because it would be tied to a mechanized system.
Okay. The Arcadis report, is that something that the council would be able to have from DEP?
Absolutely. So we've had the chance to brief the 3 Transportation and Environment Committee members, but we're also happy to schedule time with the full council, individually or collectively, to walk you through that analysis.
Or just could we read it?
Absolutely.
I might have questions, I might not.
Yes,
but I'd love to read it.
Absolutely. We fully intend to make the report available both to council as well as the public.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, just on that note, I think it is important that the council as a body publicly get a briefing on the Arcadis report. A lot of the questions you raised are the very issues the consultants had to review and make decisions on or assumptions about. And that's information that the council really needs to decide whether it even supports MRBT versus another alternative.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Levchenko, because that's an outstanding point, which is again back to other colleagues' points. very hard for us to be making this decision in the context of this budget in a very narrow time period when this really should have been a longer, fuller, more robust discussion about that specific project and then go into the budget piece, which is, we're kind of doing it backwards. Thanks.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jawando.
Thank you. I appreciate the robust discussion and all the questions and comments from my colleagues. So I'm going to go in reverse order since the report came up. So the Arcadis report is the report that cost $3 million that laid out the initial potential proposed options about how we move forward with our advanced waste system. Is that correct?
No, the report was funded through FY26 funding, which would totaled $3 million, but itself did not cost $3 million. But you are correct in noting that it does lay out an alternatives analysis, which looks at the county's current system for handling municipal solid waste, as well as comparison against alternative systems. So you're correct in that respect, Council Vice President.
Our law professors at Catholic University would be proud about the way you're answering questions today. You're doing a great job.
And allow me to thank you, but allow me to correct myself on that note. I was referring to FY25 funding just now.
Got it. Yeah. So I was right on what it is, but not right on what it cost. Got it.
Correct.
Okay. And so how much did it cost?
I don't have that total in front of me, but happy to provide that information to the council. But a subset, it came out of the FY25 $3 million funding, and I'm happy to follow back with more information on the contract drawdown.
The remaining, so there's some money left that you would intend to use, where I'm going here, for the green section on the thing. What's the remainder, whatever it is, would be used towards what? Would it be used towards the green part of Circle 49, the continued work, or what would that be used for? If there's remaining money in the contract, or does it have to be used just with that company for some follow-up? I see multiple mics lit up.
Sure. So I'm getting a lot of eager suggestions here. Did you want to weigh in, Rich?
Well, I'm not sure about what's left on the contract itself, but in terms of what's going in the 26 budget, the $3 million that was in fiscal 25 for it, $1 million has been reallocated to try to not have to increase rates to generate another $1 million, and there's a $2 million reduction you'll see in the list of itemized changes earlier on in the packet and on the page in front of me. That's the money coming out of the budget because we're going towards the $12 million for the MRBT planning. I should also say my name is Rich Harris, Office of Management Budget.
Okay, you're flying and you confuse me more. So the report, you don't know how much it cost, but it didn't cost $3 million. That was appropriated into everything.
Yeah, I'm happy to loop back. I just don't have the
that's
exact
fine,
amount in front of me right now.
And I think you were saying the continuing cost is being funneled back into the prospectively into what did you explain that again?
What I was trying to say is that the money that was in the budget for fiscal 25 to fund
the $3 million.
The $3 million is not in fiscal 26.
Right, because it was a report. It was a one-time cost, right?
Right. I just wanted to be clear that it's not
okay. Got it. Okay, it's not an ongoing cost. Yeah. Understood that. So yeah, we're great to know, because again, we're talking about money that's used to figure out what we're going to do going forward, right? And so the report that you should deliver to us and it should have been delivered to the T&E committee. It's great that they have a briefing, but my understanding is they don't have the physical report. Is that correct?
So we've shared the conclusions of the report with the TE. There's not a substantive amount of information that's yet to be shared that hasn't already been shared, but the formal report is still forthcoming.
So the yes or no answer would be no, right? The report has not been shared. Or that would be yes.
The full report has not yet been shared, but the conclusions of the report have.
With the T&E members.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
Right, just to clarify, that's been the T&E members, not a public discussion of the T&E committee
Right.
or the full council.
Right. And so the public would have no knowledge of what's in the report.
No, we've also been providing briefing for the County Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and those briefings are public and the materials are available online.
So there's some information out there. Okay. Well, I would just emphasize that I think it would be great to share it, and so that we can see it. Because here, part of this is an executive versus legislative function here. The executive's role is to do what you're doing, to go figure out what to do, and then to come to us, which is our function, and say, well, here's the money we need to do X, Y, and Z. It's hard for us to fulfill our function if we don't have a firm grasp on what you're hoping to do and accomplish. And obviously there always need to be some deference and some trust and some, expertise in that deference to the subject matter experts, which I totally get. And that's part of the function of separation of powers as well. But I think what you're hearing is it's tough to make a decision about raising fees, which in part funds what we're going to do going forward when we don't have a real clear sense of what that is. And I think that's part of the challenge. Now, I know we did have a briefing, and I thank the council president for doing this. She pushed to make sure that we had a briefing maybe a month or two ago. I can't remember now. But,
January.
Okay. Several months ago, where we did go over some very general high level, like here's if you had to take it out of town and put it on a train, stuff that was helpful. That was a helpful briefing. And I'm assuming some of that was based on some of the things you got out of the report. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yes, and I'm glad you found the briefing helpful. Thank you for the feedback.
So I just think we just need more of that. Like we need the report. We need more of that because I don't think you're trying to hide anything. I just think it's just hard to justify to the public the fee increase for that portion when we're not really sure what we want to do. Now, all that being said, I agree 1,000%, which I think most of my colleagues have shared, that we have to fund the maintenance of the current system. We can't, if you can't not have trash picked up, and as unfortunate as that is, that's the system we have, and we have to make sure that it continues to function until we transition to something else. Now, reasonable people can disagree about how quickly we can do that transition, and we've had those discussions as well, and we'll continue to have them, but I don't doubt the executive or your desire to move that forward. On the fees themselves, when did we last increase the fees, and by how much?
You mean all of the solid waste charges? Every year, there has typically been an increase in each of the sectors. We're not talking about a 25% increase. Usually it's 3 to 8%.
Like inflationary or,
Yeah.
Usually.
And it is varied by sector. It's varied by the type of fee, like the collection charge, the refuse fee, the base and incremental charges. Every year, the council has to consider the charges and pass a resolution to approve the new charges.
Right.
Typically, there has been marginal increases in them each year.
When's the last time we've had a significant increase like this? Have we had one this large?
Not that I can recall in recent years.
Okay.
I mean, and that's not to say we haven't had capital equipment purchases built into the fees.
Right, well, that's where I'm going.
But they've been more routine. The transfer station, all the solid waste facilities, they have equipment replacement schedules, and those have generally been followed. Even at the transfer station, you heard about some of the older equipment, but some of the other equipment has been replaced. This is really unique to the RRF situation in that.
What's that acronym?
I'm sorry, the resource recovery facility, the incinerator. This is more unique to that, not having had significant capital work done probably in the last 6 or 7 years. So that's where you're seeing the catch-up needed.
Right.
For
And that
this.
was alluded to by, I think, Director Monger and others, that the fees didn't go up as much because there hasn't been the maintenance and repair or replacement at the incinerator for, you're saying, 6-7 years. Is that a fair assessment of why we are here today, having to be in this position?
Thanks for the question, council member. So, I think as we were talking about it earlier, there's a logical question, which we've heard today from several council members, as to making investments in a facility from which we are transitioning away from. And that same question could, and I imagine was asked in previous years as well, that may have preceded me. But so the short answer is that as we've essentially avoided making repairs and replacements beyond necessary in recent years, we maintain that approach reflected in this year's current budget because the county's in the process and has been of transitioning away from that facility.
And so this is, in your view, the bare minimum we could do to keep this thing going and while we transition. So this is the basement number. There's nothing else that you could, because it's already been stated, we waited 6-7 years to do major things. You've already been delaying it. And so you let it build, and you can argue the logic of that approach. You know, some people would say, you know, we often talk about in PLAR and other things, if we want to maintain something for a long time, we invest over time so it doesn't get to critical stage of having to replace the compactor. But some things are at their end of life. But in the context of Dickerson, is this the lowest number you think? Is there no trimming here left on this number?
That's correct. A list of capital projects that is reflected in the FY26 budget, amended budget request, noting that on April 24th, we provided an amendment that reduced the overall request by $7 million for FY26. The list of projects before you right now was narrowed to those strictly necessary to continue the safe and reliable operations of both Dickerson and Durwood facilities.
And these are the attachments right before the. These are Circle 46, 7, 8, and 9, or 5,
yes.
6, 7. All those.
That's
all
correct.
Those lists.
Yes. So these are in fact limited to those repairs necessary for safe and reliable operations of those facilities, as well as compliance with all permits and environmental compliance requirements.
And this will get us to the transition, or you're going to have to come back in following years and ask for more at this level.
Sure. So I believe this figure is in your packet, but at this time, rates are expected to continue to increase slightly because there will be repairs necessary in subsequent years as well. It's not just an FY26 expenditure, but we also acknowledge that our base costs and our service costs are increasing, so those would be reflected in subsequent budgets.
I'm sorry. And what page is that on, Keith? Mr. Lipton? Where is the out? 13?
Circle 13.
Okay. And that's I understand that obviously everything costs more every year. The same service costs more each year. We're dealing with that in other budgets, but it won't be this level of increase going forward, right?
I'm sorry, council member, could you repeat your question?
So the large increases we're seeing this year, you don't expect to have that level of increase going forward. I'm on Circle 13 here, so I'm just looking at your chart.
Yes. So
so you have 31% this year, 6.5% next year, and you have it negative going backwards the after that.
Sure. So to orient us perhaps around numbers that are the total work, and then I can talk specifically about the increases and how we can think about them being reflected in future rates. So the amended FY26 budget request includes $28 million for repairs of both Durwood and Dickerson. We expect that figure for, again, repairs at both Durwood and Dickerson to be present, but lower in the subsequent years. At present, we're looking at $17 million in FY27 and $14.5 million in FY28. But I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of influences that are, as was acknowledged by Mr. Levchenko, that are factored into when we're talking about what the actual rates end up being calculated as, and those include increase to our base costs as well as debt service costs. So it's not only the repairs that would lead to rates, but the dollar values dedicated to repairs in future years would be less. We would expect there to be slight increases in rates going forward, however, due to increase in base costs and debt service costs.
Right.
Yeah, and just to clarify also, Circle 13 is reflective of the March transmittal.
Got it.
So the numbers are not quite apples to apples with the amended request. And also, the rate model does not include bond costs for capital construction of any alternative right now. So you do have in here, in the March transmittal, there was the MRBT current revenue assumed, and you have the RRF short-term costs, but those drop off after a few years, if you remember.
Right.
So if you've already increased the base charges, and then those drop off, you're going to see some negative numbers, but the reality is you're going to have a capital project following that somewhere. That's just not in here yet.
Right.
So that's why it's, you almost need a tour guide with this to explain what you're seeing and what you're not seeing. But the first thing is this is March. So it's a bit out of date already just because of the amended request we got over.
All right, my last question is related to the going forward. I wrote down the quote you said, which I think makes a lot of sense. You know, if we invest nothing in the what comes next, we won't have anything. So that makes a ton of sense, that you do have to plan. And to Councilmember Balcom's point, like trying to parse out what that means. I also took it to say, because you're very careful with your words, that if you got less, you could do something with it. If you got less for the green section, you could do something with it. Or you already contracted, because you kept mentioning this pre-construction facilities agreement, which I know is a term of art, where you hook up with the person, you go on a date, you get dinner, you sign an agreement, and they help guide you through it. We're using the analogy.
For the record, that was not my analogy.
So you sign up with a company, with a contractor, and they help you figure out what to do, and then they're also a part of doing it, right? Isn't that basically what this is?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you already have that agreement?
No.
All right. Okay. And is that gonna be a competitive RFP type process?
Yes.
All right. And when do you expect that to go out? And why do you expect that to be 12 million over 3 years, or each of the next consecutive 3 years?
Well, I would acknowledge that it's conditioned on funding, which brings us to our conversation today.
Absolutely. If you do nothing will happen. I got that. I think we acknowledge that.
So I'm looking to my colleagues for the latest timeline we're anticipating for that RFP, assuming funding is granted by council.
Yes, if we get funding for that
What's your
effort,
name, ma'am?
I'm sorry, I'm Kaylee Lawlicker. I'm Chief of Zero Waste Programs.
I got you. Thank you.
So we would look to put out a procurement for that in the middle of calendar year 2025.
So this summer.
Right.
Okay. And how much of the 12 million you're asking, is that totally encompassing of what you think that will cost? Is that the entire? I'm assuming that there's some administrative costs in there. Let me rephrase the question. What do you think that agreement will cost? That contract with that group that you pick will cost? Where are we getting the $12 million from?
Sure. So based on the project itself and engineering estimates, that's the expected value of the work that would need to be done in the next 3 calendar years in order to advance the project. So that's based on engineers.
36 million is?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead. Keep going. It's based on engineers. But how can you pick that number when you don't know what you're going to do?
So it's based on an analysis of the overall complexity of the project and the type of work that we anticipate would needed to be performed in order to do planning and design of that type of project for a county of our scale. So it's based on, and if my colleagues would like to add additional context, by all means, but we do have a sense of the types of services that we would need at a high level to execute in order to perform this analysis. So that figure is reflected in the budget request for the next 3 years.
Okay, and I just am trying to understand what would be another reasonable, is that, you obviously ballparked that, is that based on other communities our size, or because you're hearing concern about the number, and help me help you, and what would be how could you get the work started come back to us with some more information, but maybe not be as number that would need to increase rates as much? Because I think that's what you're hearing from folks on that section.
Sure, and I don't have a number that I could offer you at this moment that would be other than what's in the FY26 budget request. What's in the FY26 budget request is based on the scope of the project, what we, according to analysis performed by our engineers, think would be necessary to fund the types of work that would need to be done to plan this project. But I don't have an alternative number that I could offer to you at the moment.
Okay, well, I know we're taking straw votes, and I'll yield now. I just hope that you could potentially come back with something before we're done here, because
No votes. We're actually not even doing.
we're not even taking votes.
We're not
Perfect.
even doing. This
So
was.
you-
We knew this was going to be complicated.
Yeah, so you do have time. I am 100% for all the improvements. We got to do it. It's not great. I don't like it, but we have to do it because, not only is trash collection and the fourth most deadliest job in the country, it's also something that you need. But on the other part, I think reasonable questions have been asked, particularly by committee members who have been dealing with this a lot longer, about how you're going to spend that. And is there another number, given all the pressures of rates and taxes that are going up, that we could potentially start the work, because we don't want to do nothing, but that would help us to, kind of slow down the rate of increase this year. So thank you. Thank you, Madam President.
Thanks. Before I turn to my next colleague, and maybe it's just we've been talking about this almost too long, and now I'm getting confused. So I wanted to clarify one thing. As Council Vice President Jawando was talking, we have on page 2, there's a CIP amendment for the $12 million. And that's in our CIP. That's separate from the money we'll get from the fee increase.
No,
that's the same thing.
It's separate from the operating budget.
Okay.
So it does not show up in the operating budget numbers, but it's the same funding. It's
Okay.
Solid Waste Disposal Fund current revenue.
Just
So
wanna
it
make
hits the
sure.
charges in a similar way. Once again, the rate model factors all that in when determining the
Okay.
the rates.
Just wanted to double check. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you very much. I appreciate all the thoughtful questions and engagement by colleagues, particularly those not on the T&E committee, who are having this conversation really for the first time, and again, extend my appreciation to DEP for helping answer every question to the best of your ability, because it is confusing. I want to go back to the conversation about subdistricts and subdistricts A and B, and frame it, I think, in the way it needs to be. The fees that are being proposed are not necessarily for trash pickup, but it's essentially trash disposal, and it doesn't matter which subdistrict one is in. Is that a better way of thinking about it?
That's correct. As Mr. Levchenko correctly and artfully explained at the front of the conversation today, we're talking about the disposal fund. The collection fund is separate.
So any distinction between subdistrict A or B is a distinction without a difference, really, because it's a resident, a property owner, a homeowner who is paying a fee to have their trash disposed.
This is the systems benefit charge, which applies across the entire county, correct?
Okay. The inflationary and contract cost increases. Just want to go back to that. I know I asked about that in the front end, but just want to accentuate a point. Our trash collectors, they're unionized, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. It's important to fulfill their contracts and obligations. Just want to state that for the record. Another point that has been discussed but not really elaborated on. We talked about how DEP, during the budget process, you had introduced an amendment changing the fee increase from $35.5 million to $28.5 million. Is that correct? And that's coming from the sale of electricity from the incinerator?
There were two ways that the county was able to work at the direction of the county executive to reduce the FY26 rate impacts by $7 million. $4 million of the $4 million was, as you noted, council member, able to be funded from FY25 using accrued revenue from the sale of electricity. For those who aren't familiar, the waste to energy facility generates electricity, the sale of which generates revenue. And then $3 million was able to be moved to an out year, and thereby avoid them from being in FY26.
So that's an aspect that hasn't been discussed, the sale of electricity from the incinerator. And I'm not so much interested in the electricity generating aspect, but the sale of the electricity. How much does the county, or is it the incinerator, the operator of that? How does the sale of electricity work?
For those of you who followed the state legislative session in Annapolis this year, there was a lot of conversation on this topic for a related reason, because in addition to electricity sales revenue, for which the county receives revenue, historically the county has also received renewable energy credits revenue. Renewable energy credits were removed from the state renewable portfolio standard. And what does that mean? It means well, on a policy level, the right sizing of the state renewable portfolio standard, but on a financial level, it means that the revenue, which previously included revenue generated from renewable electricity credits and electricity sales, going forward will include revenue only from the electricity sales, and that's starting in the beginning of FY27. So when we were talking earlier about future years, the FY27 rates will reflect the fact that as of the start of FY27, the county will no longer be receiving revenue for the renewable electricity credits. However, back to your question, which was the sale of electricity itself, the revenue from electricity that is earned by the county varies because the revenue, the market itself for electricity sales varies based on a number of factors. But to give you a sense, most recently in FY24, the electricity sales revenue for the county was just over $10 million.
Does that go into the general fund?
No.
So where does it go? Because you're now applying $4 million. Was it $4 million?
It does not go to the general fund. It's an offset to operating revenues within the solid waste system. Expenses essentially to operate the system.
Got it. And based on the scenarios you've put forward, is the plan to use those funds or portions of them in out years as well, or was that just to make this fee increase more palatable in FY26?
So the revenue from electricity sales is used to offset operating expenses and will continue as long as the revenue exists.
Thank you. An important point there that you raised is the state is no longer allowing the renewable energy credit, right? So that will diminish. Continuing about the money, I want to pick up on what Councilmember Balcom noted before about the fee increases in the out years. And Director Monger, you noted that part of that is dedicated to debt service. Can you expand on the debt that we need to pay off with the fees that are being requested?
Sure, I'm going to let my colleague Vic Ewan speak to that. Thanks for the question.
We have a $60 million Goody remediation project that was under consent order. That project has been ongoing, and we plan debt issuance actually later at the end of this fiscal year.
16 or 60?
60.
60.
You're right.
Okay. So you're now telling us that part of this fee increase has to occur because it's tied to debt service.
Debt service coverage ratio, payments of debt service, right?
And if we didn't increase the fee, we would have to find money somewhere else to pay the debt service?
So when we're talking about the base chart, the system benefit charge, it's the base fee. It includes the system that processes our waste. As I mentioned, it's an integrated waste system, including facilities both in Durwood and Dickerson, and it also includes debt service costs to the county. So that's also paid out of the base fee.
Right. So Thank you, because I think up until this point, we've been siloing the fees and picking them apart with regard to inflationary and contractual costs, ongoing remediation that is needed to do trash collection today, right? Fees for future projects, but now there's a fourth column, which is, no, you're saying no, Ms. Wan?
It's in the first column.
That's
right.
encumbered in the first
Yes.
column. Thank
The
you.
first blue column.
I appreciate that. Okay, very good. I'm relieved to hear that. So good. I just want to let colleagues know that leaders from the Aiming for Zero Waste Task Force contacted me because they've been following this conversation. And in their observation, they shared with me a letter that was sent to the council back on May 7th, 2020, nearly 5 years ago to the day. And the letter says, if the plan forwarded to the council includes closure of the RRF, also known as the incinerator, the county council, which is responsible for approving this policy change to the plan, will need additional analysis of the costs and benefits of changing the county's primary waste disposal before making a decision. If closure is approved by the council, the county will need to move forward expeditiously with all of the transition work needed to meet a 2026 closure date. That was written 5 years ago, nearly to the date. Much of that has not happened. And it's only through this budget process are we being forced to have this conversation, which is not as straightforward as even the Aiming for Zero Waste Task Force would have wanted it to be. And the reason is because there have been years of neglect on this proposal. For nearly 6 years, nothing has been done, nothing has been proposed, and the maintenance that has been required never came about, and we are now sitting with the bill. And Councilmember Albernaz, you were spot on in what you said earlier, that failure of the current system would be catastrophic. And so I just want to close by saying this conversation is not in a silo. Earlier this morning, we had a nearly similar conversation, if you take a step back and think about it, with WSSC. Water and trash, two of the most basic functions of local government that have faced years of neglect. They're getting older, and we as a community need to figure out how we keep our people and residents healthy and safe and clean. It's two sides of the same coin, and it pained nearly all of us to have to support WSSC's work at a rate increase that I know no one wanted, but we had to do it because there were no other options. Here, there are a few different options, but we have to do something. It is obvious that the fee has to increase. The question is, how much do we increase it in order to keep our residents clean? I appreciate the council president for setting this conversation aside so that we can think about this, deliberate either amongst ourselves and our neighbors, get a pulse of what people think. I'll tell you this, when I first got the budget and saw this proposal, I was at my barber. I know you might not think, right, but I do still have a barber. And I asked Jalal what he thinks of having his trash collection fee increased by $700. He wasn't too happy about it. He's an independent barber, just trying to make good for his family. And so I'm thinking about Jalal. I am thinking about all of our other small businesses on how we keep our residents healthy and safe, but also making sure that they can still earn a living. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I have Councilmember Friedson and then Katz, and then we're going to wrap it up.
All right, I'll try to be brief. Just a couple follow-up questions based on some things that were mentioned that I just want to hone in on. The $3 million contract, we're still in the process of that contract. We don't know how much has been spent, but you're going to share that with us. So we have this contract is going to be ongoing to start next fiscal year, presumably. But we're being asked to enter into a new contract at the same time. Can you just explain what the $3 million contract is still going to do after we finally get the report that's not done, but the conclusions that have been at least shared with the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and at least privately with the members of the T&E committee, but not publicly to the council or privately to council members not on the committee? Can you just explain what's left of that contract and then how that differs from the $36 million engagement?
Sure.
Moving forward.
Sure. Thanks for the question, council member. So just as a clarification, the $3 million was the appropriation amount in FY25, not the value of the contract. And like I said earlier, we will certainly check what the remaining value is on that contract and share that with the council. To your larger question of what happens going forward and how this work relates to itself and each other. So I just want to acknowledge that when we talk about redesigning a system the size of ours, that is a important yet distinct task from operating the system that we have. So part of what the appropriation from FY25, the $3 million appropriation, was an acknowledgement of was that we have an amazing team at DEP and a number of amazing contractors that we work with day in and day out to maintain and implement the system we have. And it truly is a credit to the Recycling and Resources Management Division, which Willie oversees, and his terrific team, because in all weather, and I know you all do the early morning phone calls too in the winter, but day in and day out, implementing this system safely is no small feat, and it's something that we really pride ourselves in, whether it's at the transfer station or whether it's in the collections that we do. But the point is that implementing the system we have is a huge job unto itself with a population as large as ours. So the reason the appropriation in FY25 was really important was because we didn't have the horses internally to also redesign our system essentially and tell us what that redesign could be, what it should be. So
But is that, are we going to get a report that tells us that? Because my sense is if we already have the conclusions and what you've shared with us up to this point, we're not anywhere close to that. I mean, we're at the point of having a basic idea of what we might do to get to the next phase of finding out what we ultimately are going to do before we actually do it. And if you're confused by that, so are all of us, which is, why we've been talking about this for the last 2 hours. But, this is the pre-conversation to get us to the initial conversation, to get us to a point where we can actually talk about what the construction of a project is actually going to look like. It's the pre-plan for the actual plan to get us to an actual project that can actually be constructed. So I'm just confused as to, it sounds like the way the current $3 million contract is being described of what we're going to get as a deliverable from it is a lot like what the $36 million project is going to provide. And it doesn't seem like we have that from the current $3 million. And it's not totally clear what the $36 million is going to get us at the end of the day and when, because it's not going to lead to operating anything. It's going to lead to moving us one step closer to a potential plan to actually construct something that has a waste system that is more aligned with where we'd like to be. So if you could provide to us in writing after this conversation, so we're not voting today, exactly what the $3 million contract covered, exactly what the deliverable is on that, and exactly when the council and the public are going to receive it, number one. Number two, the exact cost out of the $3 million that has been expended and any future costs out of that existing appropriation that are anticipated in this fiscal year or next fiscal year, if it's going to have carryover, if it's encumbered funds, and what those services and deliverables will be. If it's not the full $3 million amount, where that money is going within the charge, within the fund balance, and how you're covering that. You noted before that you're not asking for the $3 million again in Vice President Joando's line of questioning, of course, because the contract is up. So the $1 million you're carrying over, it'd be helpful to know what that's covering, and then the $2 million you've just reduced. But I think that would be helpful. And then if you could give us a detailed breakdown of the timeline for the competitive bid that you're putting out, the projected expenditure timing of that, because it also seems interesting that there would be a 36 million exact 12 million, 12 million, 12 million over 3 fiscal years if you're not going to go out to bid until July or close to July. We heard, early summer, mid 2025. It's going to take many months for you to receive that, decide, move forward, and then start expending funds based on that contract. So it's not going to be a full fiscal year. So unless it's 3 years that carry over to subsequent fiscal years and you're encumbering the funds early, it would seem that the first fiscal year would be a prorated amount based on that timeline, and then the subsequent fiscal year. So it's unclear, besides having a baseline number that has been put out that's not totally clear where it came from. Was it from the consultant? Was it from another jurisdiction of similar size and scope and system that transition? That would be really helpful for us to understand if you come back to us on that. It was noted earlier about paying for the trash system or paying for trash being disposed. I just want to be clear, as noted by Councilmember Katz earlier, folks are being charged this whether they are utilizing this or not. So it is true, as I noted earlier, that this is the cost of having a waste system, which we all need to pay into that to some degree. We all create waste, even if where you live or where you work doesn't dispose of the trash that you make there or the waste that you create there on site, in the county. We all want to have a waste system that actually is disposing of the waste, but it's not paying for your trash to be dropped off, not necessarily picked up. It's paying for a waste system, whether or not you use it or not. It's just important that that be noted, because that is a distinction, and there is a potential difference there, even if there is a value to all of us, regardless of whether or not it is utilized, to have a waste system that functions. That's a critical government responsibility. And then it's been discussed before that the fee increases are capital in nature, that these are deferred maintenance and other dynamics. There was a small piece of it that was related to inflationary increases and other dynamics. There was also some conversation earlier about personnel costs that got a little bit confusing to me. Are we funding personnel costs and contracts out of the fee increases? Is that part of this? And can you break down what that amount would be?
Well, everything in the solid waste disposal fund is covered by solid waste disposal fund revenues.
I'm talking about the increase.
Right. Well, the increases, as was presented in the March transmittal by the executive, you have a lot of personnel-related changes. You've got the FY26 compensation adjustments. Those would be funded out of the solid waste charges. You may have annualization of costs from FY25. These are common things you would see in other budgets. Those have to be covered by the charges if they're increases. If they're decreases, they might help reduce the charges. But
Okay.
they are part of the whole mix.
It would be helpful, as part of the follow-up as well, to break down within the 3 columns. Column 1, debt service, inflationary increase, contractual obligations. How much of that is personnel related? Column 2 in the chart, what exactly is that broken? Because it's very, very high level, and we're being asked to fund very real dollars that we need a little bit more granular detail, and there just aren't a lot of details here of what we're actually asking folks to pay. And these are huge increases. I mean, these are not marginal inflationary adjustments that are happening. We're asking people to pay massive increases, and I think they deserve to understand fully what that money is growing towards. And then column 3, we already talked about the green, which is, breaking down, the timing and the actual costs of what that will go towards. Appreciate it, and yield back.
And just, Councilmember, happy to follow up with more detailed information as requested. In terms of the specific projects that are funded through this request, there's an additional, there's a section of the packet, circles 29 through 35, that detail each of the projects that are underlying this request. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that's there now, but I will work with the team here to follow up with the additional information you requested to explain what's within each category.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think the what's missing is the breakdown of how that relates to the chart, because a lot of the conversation is the chart and what the fee increases are and what we're being asked to authorize, and there isn't a connection. There's a bunch of things that are being funded, and then there are a bunch of costs related to the different categories, and we need to equal out the equation to understand this piece goes to this part, this piece goes to this part. This chart corresponds to these projects, and that is not as clear as it could be and would be helpful for us to have as follow-up material.
Happy to provide.
Thank you.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm very glad we're actually having this conversation. I'm not very glad we don't have enough information, but I am glad we're having it because we truly needed it, and it continues to be needed. I'd like to drill down just a little bit on the debt that we're paying, that you now have. How much was that debt, and when was it occurred?
We have not issued debt. We are planning for the debt issuance, which is the debt service is in this FY26 budget.
So I think it was the $16 million figure that
The
you were
total
talking about?
project is $60 million. We $60 million.
60 million.
Right.
You
We funded
said it was
portions of
60.
it through cash over the years, and the actual debt that we are issuing is about $38 million.
So, okay, well, that answers that one. And I agree with Councilmember Glass, I quoted Councilmember Albanaz, but the failure of the system would be catastrophic. There's no question. But the question is, and Councilmember Friedson certainly had 3 columns. I'd like a 4th one, is what is the minimum that could be done in FY26 that after this discussion, has it changed at all, so that it would only get us to the point, we don't want anything to fail, but would get us to the point that we can have the entire conversation of where we would be heading for FY27 and beyond.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember. So, by way of context, the request that's before you, and I want to acknowledge, as was noted, that what was sent over in March was a dollar amount that we then reduced a little bit by $7 million on April 24th. So the list of projects that's before us now, and the dollar amount that's requested in the fees for maintenance of our present system is in fact the list of projects that's limited to systems continuity. So
Only for this year. Everything would be just for this year coming up.
if I'm understanding your question correctly, yes, we are only talking about costs that would be incurred for these repairs in FY26 right now. There would be subsequent costs in 27 and 28, and that was the dollar figures I was recounting in response to a previous question. I'm happy to recap those. But the list of projects before us right now is in fact the minimum list of projects necessary for systems continuity.
So why are you borrowing $60 million?
We're not borrowing $60 million, and that we're only borrowing a subset of that, close to $38 million, and that is for the Goody remediation project. So completely different project. This is the Goody landfill.
So say that one again, please. You're borrowing $38 million?
Yeah.
And that's only for 26. That would be what you need for 26, FY26.
Well, the Goody landfill remediation project was a project the council approved several years ago.
Well, yeah, that's different,
Right,
yeah.
and it was intended to be bond funded. They were able to defer some of that by using basically PAYGO, but now they are planning to bond fund the rest of that project that remains. And that would start in '26, but the bonds for that obviously would go beyond '26.
All right, so subtract out Goody. I understand that one. And there was methane gas and everything else involved in there. But only for, and I understand the transfer part. I mean, I remember when the county bought the transfer facility, the land, and all the excitement that caused. But I appreciate that the transfer facility is more than likely going to stay there. And I appreciate the fact that you're going to need to fix up, whether it's for whatever you mentioned that are 40 years old, whether or not we need to buy 3 the first year, whether we can buy 1 this year and that gives you 2. All of that is what I consider to be minimum. But the whole thing for Dickerson, to me, really is putting gasoline in somebody else's car. I just don't understand why we do that. I understand we have to keep it safe, but I don't understand why we'd have to do it to the degree that is being suggested. And obviously, if you could give the 4th column, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, Council Member, I appreciate the question. There's a memorandum in the packet which explains that, which goes into the detail that you're describing. It's an explanation of need for projects over 26, 27, and 28. So there is extensive information available. We're happy to sit down and talk through that with you if it's helpful. And as I mentioned earlier, the list of projects we're talking about was narrowed down to those necessary to safe and reliable operations of the.
And you keep talking about 27 and 28. I keep talking about 26. I want to know what would get us through 26, not 27 and 28. We might get there eventually, but not yet.
Right, and that figure is what's represented in the FY26 budget request.
Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilmember Sales, and she's going to close us out.
All right. So everyone has asked a lot of the questions. We already discussed last week, so I will not repeat them. But I did want to find out, where do condos fall in this category? Are they multifamily or single?
Multifamily.
Okay, good. And then these amounts are on top of the 160 per household amounts? Or are these the new amounts?
What
I'm
chart
sorry,
are you
what page
looking
are
at?
you- right.
What page are you on?
Looking at Circle 11,
Um,
the assumptions.
If you look on page 5, so multifamily, if you go across, under the CE amended in FY26, they would pay $19.88 for the year.
Okay. Okay, that's all I had. So looking forward to hopefully lower numbers for the bare minimum, because I know that you're going to transition us out of this cycle very soon and be proposing some ideas. So we look forward to the updates.
Thank you, Council Member.
Thank you, Director.
Okay, thank you for the background. I think there are, one of the reasons we wanted to do this on the very first day that the full council was reviewing the budgets, because we knew there would be a lot of questions and the need for some follow-up, and I think you have all of the items that we need to follow up on. So that would be good to get soonish. We are voting on May 14th on the actual solid waste management fee, so to get that ahead of time. And Mr. Lachenko, I know we weren't going to take a hand vote on the solid waste management fee, but were there any other pieces of this that we needed to do anything with as we advance on working on our budget?
Well, I did note some of the areas where the committee had made recommendations, including like the solid waste collection fund budget, and also the refuse charge and the collection charges did not come up today specifically, other than in the broader impact on the sectors. So those have either no increase or a very, very, very small increase. So I'm assuming those are not really part of the follow-up that we need. We're really focusing on the base and the incremental charges where the big increases are, and the bigger picture issues of the MRBT project and the RRF costs. So those other areas, I'll assume the council's preliminarily okay with. Obviously, you'll see it again as part of the packet for the March 14th action.
I am not seeing any questions, though I will just tell my colleagues, make sure that you take a look at those. Since we dove into the solid waste management fee today, just to make sure, and if you do have questions, don't wait till May 14th. Please bring them up now. But I think today we dug in deep on these issues, and we look forward to the follow-up. And I'm not seeing any other hands. Thank you, Mr. Lachenko. Thank you, Director Monger, and the entire team. Very much appreciate your time. And with that, that is the last item we have for today. We are adjourned. Thank you.